Hi, I'm Bob Balls for the That's Jesus channel. Thanks for tuning in. The other day, my wife Wendy and I were talking about men and women influencers within the world of Christianity and how many of them are renouncing their faith, how many of them are having to step down from positions of authority, how many of them are being fired, how many of them are just being an embarrassment to the world of Christianity, actually. And we just really got to thinking, why is that happening? How? What should we do? I'd like to give you my thoughts on that. Now, I am not the pastor of a church. I've never been the pastor of a church. Um, but I have spoken a few times at church, and I'd just like to share with you what I'm thinking. The first thing I think that churches around the world need to do is to stop allowing a 20-something-year-old whose brain isn't even fully developed to be an actual independent influencer within the church. Now, there are exceptions. Now, I personally know a few of them, and it's a good rule of thumb, though, to follow the advice of the Apostle Paul that mature men and women need to teach and not abdicate that role to someone with no real experience facing a world that challenges their faith. Second, I think we need to look at their message. Look at the message of the people in authority. We've raised generations of believers whose belief is based on nothing more than the milk of popular worship songs, honestly. They don't know their Bible. They don't know the history of their theology. They don't know apologetics. They don't know the actual gospel that Jesus preached or that John the Baptist preached. And their writing, their messages, their sermons, their songs reflect that lack of depth. Yet churches are looking to them and their words for guidance. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of large churches, when their leadership fails, a lot of the flock leaves. The flock just hasn't been matured by the leadership in that church. So that's something to look at. Third, we need to stop seeking to have our ears tickled. The reason these influencers gain a place of status is because the church no longer desires meat. Now, I have been blessed. Almost every church family that I've ever been a part of has had real, regular messages that made me think. They challenged me to study more. But that is not enough. Being a teacher for over a decade in public schools, I know that people can regularly turn out a sermon every week, and we should be like the Jerusalem church, and we should study with believers at home on a regular basis. I know preachers, I know several preachers, and they are all godly people. But I know for a fact, as a teacher myself, you can get into a rhythm where you're only churning out really good sermons about every fifth or sixth try. Because those other ones, they're just filler because you're working on that really one good one. And sometimes it takes a month or more to get that really good one. So we, as believers, we need to work on that ourselves. We need to seek out other believers. We need to be with other believers in our homes on a regular basis. We should be like the Bereans, and we should examine the scriptures for ourselves. Now, here's a note. They were examining the Old Testament to see whether Paul's message was true. Do we look at the Old Testament to see whether the messages of our preachers are true? We should be able to do that. We should be like the churches of Paul's journeys who wrote to him because they were interested enough to seek clarification. We need to stop seeking lyrics to songs. We need to stop seeking sermons that make us feel good. We need to stop seeking poems read from the pulpit that make us feel holy. We need to stop seeking a good orator who's able to spur us on to making us feel like we're on fire. What we need to do is start seeking truth that transforms our lives into reflecting the holiness of Jesus. Last, church leaders need to lead. It is not the job of a pastor, a preacher, an elder, a minister, a bishop, an overseer, a shepherd, whatever you want to call them. It is not their job to grow the church. God does that. They are not the owners of the flock. They are the caretakers. They are the shepherds in the field. They do not own the flock. Their primary purpose is not the business of the church. Their primary purpose is not the bookkeeping of the church or reaping the benefits of having a leadership role. It is their job to ensure that the flock they are currently shepherding is well fed and watered. They should be among the sheep enough to know that if any of them has a wound that needs tending, it's going to get tended to. They should be so aware of the people in their church that they can immediately recognize when any of them is wandering astray and bring them back into the fold. They are to be available at any time to settle the spirits of a sheep who's anxious or hurting. They need to move the sheep constantly to new food and new pastures that can provide nourishing substance. And they are to watch the growth of each lamb and ensure that they migrate away from milk to a more substantial diet that allows them to be productive adult sheep. They are to keep the sheep so healthy that they, the sheep, increase the size of the flock. Not by procreating on their own, although that's always a good way to grow the flock. The sheep need to be about the business of proselytizing and spreading the gospel. And obviously, to the point of this video, they must protect the flock from enemies outside and enemies inside the fold. Now, that's a very big endeavor. But those are my thoughts on it. If you agree, let me know. If you disagree, let me know. I hope you take the time to hit that like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you. Have a great day. Be blessed.